Hello everyone, tonight we will relax with the story Spiritual Mysteries in Medieval Royal Family. Let's start. You are standing on the edge of the palace courtyard, where candlelight illuminates red velvet robes, silver swords glint, and the air is thick with the scent of armor polish. The king, the most powerful man in the kingdom, is descending the great stone steps. His armor carved with golden lions so heavy that his guards have to support him at every step. But it is not the weight of the armor that strikes you. It is the strange clanking sound that comes from inside his chest every time he bows. One night, as you quietly remove the king's armor from his shoulders and hang it on a wooden rack, your hand accidentally touches a small leather pouch sewn into the inner lining. What's inside isn't a love letter or a tactical map as you might expect. Instead, there are human teeth, dry and yellow, mixed with a few clumps of reddish-brown owl feathers. There's even a long strand of hair, not his. It's red as fire. When you ask, the king just curls his lips. That's why I've never lost a battle. Before you can even react, he turns around, his voice deep, touching it without permission. Might cause horns to grow on your head. Then he laughs. It's unclear whether it's a joke or a warning. In those days, victory was not only achieved by sword and shield. In the eyes of a medieval king, the battlefield was also a place where supernatural forces watched every move. Generals could lose their fortunes by forgetting to wear ancient amulets. Soldiers wore bird claws under their breastplates, and emperors wore human teeth on their left breast. Historically true? Yes. Many European kings used to hire wise women to concoct talismans before going into battle. They were tucked into helmets, shoes, or sewn into the lining of a shirt. One popular talisman was a mixture of dead man's teeth, holy ash, and black cat's blood. A little different from the military tactics you learn in textbooks, right? And here's the strange thing. Historians once discovered a small leather pouch containing a bloody cloth in King Henry V's armor. Whether it was his own blood, the blood of a saint, or something else, is still debated. Some say he did it to make a blood pact with God. Others say he was simply afraid. You would think that a man who could rule an entire kingdom would have to overcome superstition. But you know, the greater the power, the greater the fear. Every night before battle, the king would not sleep, would not eat, would only mumble to himself with his amulet bag. And strangely enough, he usually won one day. While you were cleaning your armor, you tilted the pouch and inhaled its scent. It smelled of damp leather, burnt incense, and something like burnt popcorn. You almost sneezed, but held it in. Not out of politeness, but because you could feel the pouch growing warm. Even though you had taken off your armor half an hour ago, maybe you're imagining it. Or maybe, as the old servants whispered, the charm only works when it comes into contact with royal blood. A few weeks later, when the king was out hunting, you saw him roll down the hill and hit his head on a rock. Everyone was horrified. But he got up, blood running down his neck, and laughed loudly. I forgot to bring the charm. But maybe this will help him recharge. You're half convinced. Maybe you should get yourself a small leather bag. It might get you through a week of cleaning his shoes. You sit in the corner of the room, trying to avoid the flickering light from the fireplace that shines on the king's forehead, sweaty despite the bitter cold outside. The dream comes again. The 11th this month, according to your secret notebook. It's the same long, shadowy road, the eyeless faces staring out of the mist, and a giant shadow standing at the end, saying nothing but waking him up to shout, I didn't do it. Don't do it. Don't worry. You're not the only one. Who's been woken up? The whole castle shudders every time that scream rings out in the middle of the night. But what's strange isn't the content of the dream. It's how the king handles it. You were sent to find the royal magician, an old man with almost no hair left. But who keeps a toad the size of a small pot? He sits on the stone floor, flipping through the pages of a sheepskin book, then looks at you with a tired gaze. Here we go again, huh? When you return, you find the king sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by ashes and lavender petals. In front of him is an iron bowl filled with ... frog blood, warm and steaming. Slightly, you are startled, but kneel down as usual. The king does not look at you, but whispers, "If I see this one more time, the throne will turn to stone." Was he speaking metaphorically, or was he simply scared out of his wits? You're not sure? But after the ritual, the king slept for 3 days, and when he woke up, he said with relief, "The toad has eaten the shadow." Yes, you heard right, toad eats darkness in history. Many medieval kings used bizarre dream-solving methods, such as sleeping in tombs, holding blood charms under their tongues, or bathing in donkey milk. But few people know about dream transference rituals, an ancient practice in which fears are transferred from people to objects, usually toads, snakes, or roosters. Modern historians still debate the effectiveness of these rituals. Some say they were primitive psychotherapy, helping the king feel he had control over the uncontrollable. Others say they were just a form of superstition to mask the onset of mental illness. You see one thing clearly, after each time like that, the king became calmer, and also stranger. One time, he ordered the toad to be buried under his pillow because he was afraid it would run away, taking my dream with it. A few weeks later, you're adjusting the curtains in your room when you hear a whisper, but no one's there. You bend down and look under your pillow. The toad is dead and dry, its skin wrinkled like bark. Its mouth opens, revealing a human tooth, very similar to the one in the charm bag. You don't tell anyone, because you start seeing the shadow in your own dreams. Not often, just a couple of times. But each time it gets closer, and the only thing you can do is avoid eye contact with it, because, who knows, maybe dreams are contagious. One night, while you are wiping a foggy window, you see the king standing in his watchtower, talking to his shadow in the moonlight. He tilts his head, as if listening to a distant whisper. Then he nods, smiles faintly. "Yes, I know, but not yet." And he turns and walks away, as light as if he were wearing no armor, no age, no weight of kingship. You can't sleep that night, because you suddenly remember in your last dream the shadow had taken shape, and it looked a lot like you. You kneel on the cold stone floor, wiping the veins along the throne as usual. But today, your hand touches a strange bulge beneath the old velvet carpet. Unable to contain your curiosity, you stealthily lift the edge. And there, hidden between the faded stones, is a small crack and niche covered by a fake tile, almost invisible without touching. You glance around, then nudge it with the broom handle. The tile pops out. Beneath it, there is not gold or silver or secret letters as you had imagined. Instead, there is a small burlap bag, so rotten that it smells of damp earth and something like crushed bones. Your hands tremble, but you carefully open it. Inside is a handful of broken bones mixed with long, dry silver hair. In a thin strip of leather, hand-carved in faded ink, "He who sits upon the throne must be sheltered by the souls of the fallen." You hear footsteps. Startled, you cover everything up, gasping for air, but something inside you has changed since you saw those bones. Even as you return to your work, wiping the armrests with the rabbit fur rag, your mind still wanders to the question, who fell? Your question leads you to the palace library, where there is more dust than books. After hours of rummaging through the pages, you find an old, almost forgotten note. A previous king had lost his throne to a betrayal. The spot where he fell was later used to build a new throne for his successor. Legend has it that his spirit still lingers in the stone and will only rest if the remains of the forgotten man are offered. What does it mean? Modern historians have two theories. One is that the bones belonged to the former king, buried in a ritualistic manner to reverse bad luck on the throne. It was like a kind of soul anchor. The other is that they were the remains of a political enemy, a vengeful act of witchcraft, using the remains of a decapitated person to hold the throne steady. Either way, you can't forget the cold feeling of holding the bag of bones. It's like holding the hand of someone long gone, and they still remember you in the days that followed. You notice that the king began to change. He would often sit on his throne for long periods of time, his eyes absent-minded. Once you saw him close his eyes, whispering a lullaby that no one had taught him. His voice was deep and even, as if he was singing to an invisible child sitting under the throne. You thought you were imagining it. Until one night, with thunder and lightning, you heard that song. Coming from the crack in the stone under the throne when the king was not around, you decide to check again. It's time you bring a candle and a small knife. When you pry open the tile again, the cloth bag is still there. But there is something else. A silver coin. A coin that has been out of circulation for more than half a century. Someone has come and left an offering. The king was not the only one who believed in ancestral energy. It seemed that the throne was a spiritual machine that worked silently, known only to a few people in the palace. Should you tell anyone? No. You know that if you do, you will be the next one to be sacrificed to keep the throne standing, so you keep quiet. Every morning, you wipe the throne more gently. Every night, you sprinkle a little salt around the base of the throne, as the old nanny taught you. And lately, you've been having dreams. A man in a red cloak, with long silver hair, stands in the middle of the hall and smiles at you. He doesn't say anything, but his eyes aren't resentful. They're just waiting. You know, you'll have to put the bag of bones back in place. And this time, sprinkle some rosemary to help him sleep more peacefully. The morning is bitterly cold. The sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows casts a series of red, purple, and blue fragments on the stone floor. You enter the royal dressing room, holding a new mink robe from the north. The king is awake, standing before the mirror. But he does not look at himself. You realized your mistake in time when his eyes glared at you. Then he hissed through gritted teeth. Who allowed you to open the mirror when the sun just rose? The air is heavy. The room seems frozen. You quickly close the mirror, bowing your head so low that your hair touches your shoes. You think you might have just brought down a dynasty. What you don't know, or you forgets, that there's an unspoken rule in the palace. Mirrors must not be opened from sunrise until the second morning bell rings. The king believes that the first light of day shining on the mirror reflects the soul, and if that soul isn't awake, it will shatter. Sounds odd? Maybe, but superstitions about mirrors are not new. In the Middle Ages, many people believed that mirrors were windows between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Mirrors reflected souls and fate. Mirrors could be infected with evil spirits if viewed at the wrong time. It is recorded that King Charles VI of France banned all mirrors from his palace after claiming that one made him hear the voice of the devil. Some modern scholars believe he suffered from schizophrenia. Others do not rule out the possibility of being possessed. Your king is not mad, but he remembers every prophecy his great-grandmother left him. A hand-carved note kept in a secret vault reads, "If the first light of day strikes the king's mirror, darkness will know he is awake." It sounds like an otherworldly threat, and ever since he ascended the throne, everyone in the palace has followed this rule like a rite of passage. Only you, the newbie from the kitchen, didn't know. Now you do. and the price you pay is being demoted to being the firekeeper of the royal baths for 3 weeks. It's not scary, but enough to make. You wonder why sunlight would scare someone so powerful. What's even more strange is that he himself never looked in the mirror during the day. You've seen him standing in front of the mirror late at night, one hand on his chest, the other lightly touching the cold surface of Mercury. He doesn't smile, he doesn't adjust his hair, he doesn't look. He just stares deeply into. It is as if searching for something one night. While you're cleaning your study, you find a small notebook lying open under the table. Inside it is a detailed account of the last time the king saw a strange shadow in the mirror. At one point he writes, "The shadow does not follow me. It is still a child." Beneath it is a scribbled picture of a child, wearing royal robes. You've heard rumors that the king ascended to the throne after the mysterious disappearance of his youngest brother. No confirmation, no funeral, just disappearance. No one in the palace ever mentioned it again, and you start thinking, if the mirror doesn't reflect you, then who does it reflect? Modern scholars call it one of those unspoken royal hauntings, where guilt and superstition are so intertwined that even the sufferer can't tell what's spiritual and what's pathological, but for you, the person who has to polish. Each mirror, the only thing you know for sure is this: when the first light of day hits the glass, the mirror doesn't just shine, it comes alive. One day, you sneak a look in the mirror at dawn, just for a few seconds. In it, you see your face, but slower, as if your reflection is waiting for you to get a step ahead. And in the reflection, you see something that isn't you. You cover the mirror. And from that day on, you start waking up earlier than the morning bell. Just to make sure you don't accidentally wake up some soul that's still sleeping, you stand in the middle of the queen's bedchamber, candlelight flickering on the carnation-embroidered curtains. Not a sound. The queen has just fallen asleep after a long evening of feasting, her hands still loosely clutching the Bible, her fiery red hair spread across the pillow. You swallow. With trembling hands, you hold the small scissors wrapped in purple velvet. You don't want to do this, but orders are orders. The king whispered, the wine in his eyes. Give me a lock of her hair before she takes my soul. You'd thought it was just jealousy. But no, the look on his face, it was like fear. You gingerly cut off a small strand, tie it with a silver thread, and hide it in your sleeve. As you retreat, you overhear the queen whispering in your dreams, "He called my name again." In the old well, your skin crawls. No one told her about the well. No one goes near it after dusk. When you reach the king's private chambers, you hand over the lock of hair. He takes it as if it were the last gold bar left in the world. He places it on black velvet, along with a tiny silver necklace, the kind you saw the queen wearing when she was newlywed. He sprinkles salt, lights candles, and murmurs what sounds like Latin, but is distorted and patched together. When the ceremony is over, he ties the hair into a knot and tucks it into a leather pouch worn at his chest, right over his heart. Strange fact? Love potions were an integral part of medieval court life. Wise women, healers, and even monks secretly offered charms made from hair. Menstrual blood and fingernails often, mixed with honey and wormwood ash to bind the soul of a loved one. Modern historians still debate the prevalence of so-called royal love charms. Some accounts describe King Edward IV allegedly being charmed by Elizabeth Woodville, who later became his wife. Skeptics call it a convenient excuse for apolitical love. But you who live in the palace, you who have seen the lock of hair hidden like gold in the cedar chest, you know well, the king believes. And that is the most terrifying thing. He did not hate the queen, On the contrary, he loved her, desperately and fearfully at the same time. He believed she had bewitched him with black magic, believed that his feelings were no longer his own. Once you heard him crying in the middle of the night, clutching his chest, whispering, "If you stop loving me, my heart will stop." You wonder, if people believe their love is the result of a spell, do they still love? Or are they just afraid of losing the feeling of love? One morning you find him burning a piece of paper written in blood. The wind swirls the paper, and you can only make out a few words. "If I stop loving her, she will disappear." Maybe it was a curse. Maybe it was a warning to himself. A few weeks later, the queen suddenly changed. She became quieter, more calm. Her eyes often looked far away, as if she was listening to music from somewhere else. One time she held her friend's hand and asked softly, "Do you ever feel like your heart is no longer in your chest? You don't know how to answer?" And from that day on, you start tying a string around your wrist every night, just to remind yourself, your heart, your feelings, they all still belong to you. One stormy night, the king knocked on the door of the study where his friend was cleaning books. His hair was wet, his robe was in tatters, and in his hand was a torn amulet bag. Inside, a lock of hair was burning against the wind. He shouted, "You are dreaming of someone else." You stand there, your hands shaking, and suddenly you understand something no one taught you in this sign. When superstition and love meet, the first to fall is always the one who believes he is in control. You kneel beside the royal altar, which usually holds only beeswax candles and hymn books. But today there's something strange. The king has had everything cleared away no more. Holy images, no more silver crosses. Instead, on the table is a rotten log, jagged and dark as rotting flesh, carefully placed on a red velvet cloth and gold trim like a treasure. You dare not ask. But your eyes must have given too much away, because the king chuckled softly. "Don't you recognize this piece of wood? It is the remains of the true cross." Then he looked deep into your eyes, solemn, as if revealing a vital secret, touching. "My forehead every morning keeps me from being blinded by falsehood." You nod, though inwardly you're not sure if you're hearing about a religion or some form of systematic insanity. The piece of wood seemed like nothing more than a driftwood. But from the day it appeared, the king changed. He stopped going to the great chapel, canceled all services with priests, and prayed alone before the log. Every morning he bowed his head, touched his forehead to it 3 times, and whispered something like, "Let me not see what I should not see." The first time you heard it, you thought he was talking about sleepwalking. The second time, you thought he might be haunted by a prophecy. By the third time, you began to believe him. Throughout history, it has been common for kings to believe. They possessed authentic relics, the fingernails of St. John, the hair of St. Mary, or a fragment of the skull of some martyr. But an anonymous piece of wood, treated as a second crown, that is something historians still debate. One side argues that this was simply a form of faithful self-hypnosis, the emperor placing his trust in a worthless object to give himself peace of mind. The other side points out that in the list of relics of King Louis IX, who organized an entire campaign to collect them, there is a note about a black wood of unknown origin contained in a golden box, from which no one knows where. Have you ever tried to pick up a piece of wood while cleaning? It felt unusually heavy, not in a physical way, but in a way that made your arm ache after holding it for only a few seconds. Maybe you imagined it. Maybe it actually sucked the energy out of the person touching it. One day you peeked through the crack in the door as the king performed a ritual. He cut his finger, dripping blood onto the wood. Its drop made a small, dry sound like ash falling into a fire. Then he smiled, but not a smile of relief. The smile of someone who had done something terrible and was waiting to see what would happen. A few days later, his most trusted aide suddenly fell off his horse and died in the middle of the palace courtyard. His head was broken, his mouth was still open as if he wanted to shout something. The king did not shed a single tear. He only said softly, "Whoever does not believe in the holy wood should lie down and ask him." You start lighting a small candle in your room every night under your pillow, like your grandmother did when you were a child, to keep away bad luck. Not because you're afraid of ghosts, but because you're afraid of the trust of someone in power. One night, the wind blows out all the candles in the emperor's chamber. You are called in to replace him. When you enter, he is sitting, hugging a piece of wood to his chest like a child hugging a pillow. His eyes are closed. His lips are moving, and you swear you hear him whisper, "If you cannot keep the throne, keep the wood." It is stronger than I. You step back, heart pounding. And as you turn, you see in the reflection the piece of wood isn't still, it's breathing. Maybe you were too tired. Maybe you had been in this palace for too long to distinguish between reality and illusion. But from that day on, you never looked directly at the log again. You began to understand. In the palace, what was placed on the altar was not necessarily a god. Sometimes it was just a part of fear that had taken shape. The battle was fought in the northern hills, where the grass was parched and crisp in the sun, and the dust curled like smoke from a brick kilt. You and your retinue rode close behind. The king, whose armor was so shiny it sent crows soaring from the rice paddies. The enemy was in position, flags were flying, horns were blowing, and then the king stopped. You think he sees something in the enemy? But he doesn't. He just bows his head, looking down at the dirt road in front of him. A black cat is walking by, slowly, as if it were strolling through a market. You and several others see it too. Some of you laugh at the odd coincidence, but when you turn to the king, your smile fades. He turned pale, his eyes wide open, and sweat poured out as if he had been stabbed. Then, without explaining why, he raised his hand to signal to retreat. And so the entire army, the most disciplined and elite in the kingdom, turned and fled south, as if the sky were falling. The enemy was so shocked that they stood still, not understanding what was happening in official history. That retreat is recorded as a flexible strategic tactic to avoid losses. But you're the one who had to carry the king's helmet while he rode and whispered. He looked at me, no better. The black cat to the king was more than just an animal. It was the ultimate omen, an irreversible omen. And worst of all, it was the third cat he had seen that month. In many medieval cultures, black cats were associated with witchcraft, darkness, betrayal, and even ... the devil. It was believed that black cats could see the souls of the dead or the true nature of an impostor. One French king executed a dozen cats because he believed they were the eyes and ears of his would-be assassin. On the other hand, some Italian courts worshipped cats. As guardians, depends on the place, depends on the person. But for your king, they were the end. Modern scholars still debate whether such behavior stems from superstition, pathology, or a form of counter-control, when the emperor used supernatural excuses to retreat from unfavorable situations. But if you saw him shivering every time he heard a cat meowing at night, you'd think he wasn't acting. Have you ever asked an old courtier, "If black cats are so scary, why don't you ban all cats in the city?" The courtier simply shrugged and replied, "He believes that the cat is not a cat. It is a person who has been betrayed." You don't want to understand, but you still find yourself waking up in the middle of the night to a faint scratching. At your door, when you open it, there's no one there. It's just a very thin claw mark on the wooden door, and 3 short black hairs. A week later, the king ordered that salt be strewn around the entire palace. All entrances were to be sprinkled in a pentagram pattern. No one was to wear black except for funerals. And most importantly, no mention of the word cat on Fridays. You know this is a superstitious fear. But you also know that such fears are often more deeply rooted than any law. One day, when the king met an envoy from the east, the envoy brought with him a painted picture, a goddess riding a black cat. The king tore up the picture on the spot and banished the whole party that night, you see. And you never wear black velvet again, not even in winter. The question that scholars have not been able to answer is, can fear of black cats affect the strategy of governing a country? You have the answer. It affects the fate of the country. And people like you, who have to clean up fake cat poop under the palace steps every morning for fear that it is a signal. Lately, the black cat has been gone. But you start to see a dark shadow flitting by every time you turn your mirror at night. You're not sure it's a cat. You're also not sure it's a person. You know one thing. If one day the king orders his troops to retreat in the middle of breakfast, just because of a meow sound coming from somewhere, you will not laugh anymore. You will follow, in silence, and sprinkle salt on your back. The crescent moon hung in the dark sky, just bright enough to illuminate the castle on the pond behind the royal garden. You walked silently across the stone path, holding the dried flowers in your arms. As the king had commanded, at midnight, place it on her grave. Not too early, not too late.
Ow.
The words echoed in your head like a curse. She was none other than the late first queen, the king's first wife. Dead for more than a decade. No one spoke of her anymore. No portrait, no oral history. Her grave lay isolated in the back garden, untended, unlit by candles, and everyone knew why. But no one dared to say it. Some say she died in her sleep. Others whisper that she was poisoned by knowing too much. But you, kneeling among the weeds, placing the dried flowers with trembling hands on the stone-cold tombstone, know something else. Every month, on the night of the new moon, the king sends someone to the tomb, not to visit, but to suppress. Story you hear from an old butler with 5 teeth and a memory as muddled as a kitchen towel goes like this. The late queen was the only one who dared to openly challenge the king when he began to have strange beliefs. She tore up his amulet at a banquet. She burned the bag of bones buried under the throne. She declared, "If a throne needs blood to stand, it is not worthy of being a throne." A few months later, she slept and did not wake up. The king did not cry, but from that night on, he never slept soundly again. And from that night on, he began the dried flower ritual. What is the strange truth? In some regions, folklore believes that those who have died unjustly or who have rebelled against authority cannot rest in peace, and to silence them offerings. Usually dried flowers must be sent every month as a way to talk to the dead without waking them up. Modern historians have fiercely debated the late empress's true role in the imperial court. Some say she was simply the victim of palace intrigue. Others believe she was actually a treasure, a kind of spiritual force that kept the throne in balance, and that her death marked the beginning of a never-ending series of superstitions. After placing the flowers, you quickly turned away, not daring to look back. But after taking a few steps, you heard a sound. Rustlevery, slightly behind you. Wind, maybe. But the wind never blows up your neck when you are walking into the wind. You don't turn around. Even though your spine is cold and your heart is pounding, like a drum, when you get back to your room, you check the spare bouquet and the basket still there. So where did the bouquet you ordered come from? The next morning, the king ordered the flowers to be retrieved, kept them in a lacquer box placed by his bedside. Every morning he opened the lid and smelled them. And sometimes he smiled slightly, as if someone had just said to him, "I am still here." You start to keep a record of each ritual. You notice every time he forgets to perform the ritual 11. For one night, something strange happens in the palace. People fall into a deep sleep. Mirrors crack for no reason. Candles burn backwards, like the last time all the king's pigeons fly away, leaving only an empty cage swaying in the wind. Even though the cage door has never been opened, from then on, you always prepare dried flowers for every new moon night, even when not told to. You didn't believe it completely, but you didn't dare not believe it either. One day while you were cleaning the windowsill, you saw the king standing in the middle of the garden, holding a bunch of wilted flowers, looking at his ex-wife's grave. He said nothing, but his lips moved, and if you read his lips correctly, he said, "Thank you for not dragging me away." That's the moment you understand superstitions, sometimes, aren't about controlling gods or destiny, but to ask for forgiveness. You stand in a subterranean archive, where the air smells of old leather, beeswax, and a metallic temps like dried blood. Before you are dozens of wooden chests bearing the royal seal, each locked with a mechanism more complex than a vault lock. But it's not the chests themselves that make you shudder. It's the wall behind them. A rough stone wall, bare of any decoration, except 27 hand-carved names running from ceiling to floor. Each name was accompanied by a small symbol. One was a feather. One was a drop of blood. One was a broken circle. You discover them when you accidentally drop a candle and bend down to pick it up. Under the flickering candlelight, the carvings are clearer than ever. You know right away it's not a random list. And you also know without anyone's permission, you're reading something you shouldn't. The next day, you ask the oldest kitchen maid in the palace. She looks at you for a long time, then says softly, "You have found the silent wall." The silent wall, she said, was where the names of oath-breakers, those who had worked for the royal family and died for, revealing something that should not have been revealed, were engraved. Not for treason, but for revealing some superstitious secret, a secret that should never have left the palace. You feel a chill down your spine, because it seems like you're getting closer to that list. Legend has it that every time someone carves a name on the wall, they must perform a soul-sealing ritual that is binding the soul of the deceased into the character so that they cannot reincarnate, cannot leave the palace. It will be here forever, seeing, hearing, but not speaking. The king believed in the ritual, absolutely. It is said that he personally engraved the name of a courtier who accidentally mentioned the holy wood ritual to a foreign priest. 3 days later, the man was found dead in a well. His eyes were wide open, his hands still raised as if asking for help. No funeral, no reminder. Modern historians have fiercely debated the concept of soul sealing. One camp argues that it was a symbolic ritual, a deterrent. Others point to archaeological evidence that some ancient castle walls contain real human ashes in the mortar. That is, the dead weren't just inscribed with their names. They were mixed into the stone. You start to notice that every time you step into the vault, the atmosphere changes. It feels like you're stepping through an invisible membrane. Your ears ring slightly, your hands and feet suddenly feel cold. And every now and then you hear whispers, not loud enough to make out the words, but enough to make you turn your head every time. One afternoon, the king called you into his study. His voice was low and strange. "You have seen the wall, have you not?" You sweated, not knowing whether to nod or shake your head. He did not wait for an answer. He simply said, "Now you understand why I cannot leave this place." Then he said, every night he dreamed of each name on the wall walking past his bed one by one. They were not resentful. They did not demand his life. They just looked at him as if to ask, "Is the oath still valid?" You asked softly, "Your Majesty, did they ever say anything to you?" The king smiled lightly. "No, they are the best men of their word I have ever known. From that day on, you always said a silent prayer before going into the cellar. Won't say anything. All just dust. You didn't dare look directly at the wall anymore. And you always carried a bunch of dried sage in your pocket. One night, while you were sleeping, you were startled by 3 knocks on the door. There is no one in the hallway. But under the door, there is a small piece of paper on which there is only one line. When someone speaks the truth in a castle of lies, they become an echo. You can't sleep again. And you understand why the king keeps looking around behind him, even when you're the only one in the room, maybe, to have become part of the story you cannot tell. And maybe, someday, if someone bends down by the candle in the basement, they will see your name on line 28. You stand in the middle of the throne room, where the air is as thick as cold soup, and the light from the high windows falls like cold knives. The king sits on his throne, silent, motionless, but not like a statue. He is alive. You know it because his eyelids twitch, and the hand on his knee still gently clasps a necklace of sheep bones. There was no one else in the room. The court session had been abruptly canceled with only one reason: the moon was leaning into a bloody corner. You don't understand right away, but then you remember the lunar calendar hanging on the library wall with its intricate symbols, triangles, slashes, and a small circle with a red mark, the symbol for the night of blood. A special night, according to the king, when the fate of the nation is turned by the axis of dreams. You've heard many of his superstitions, but this time it's different, because this time he decided to do nothing. No troops, no ambassadors, no decrees. He just sits there from noon until the candles are lit, so as not to disturb the balance of heaven and earth. And you, the one who has been given the sole task, avoid letting anyone within 21 paces of the throne. It was the drum circle. Ritual, an ancient concept that emerged in some European dynasties, believing that the space around the throne was where fate settled, and any strange footsteps could derail a dynasty's course. Some modern scholars believe it was just a form of control through fear. But you who have seen a sparrow break its neck as it flew into the middle of the room can't be so sure. In that strange silence, King began to mumble. You did not dare to come near, but each word fell on your ears like hail. Tonight, if I breathe hard, the sky will tilt. My soul is heavier than this throne. Just one cough, and the fire will go out. You begin to realize something. He's not afraid of the supernatural. He's afraid of himself. And then the most chilling thing happens. A young courtier, unwarned by you, steps into the forbidden zone. Just one step. Just one. The king raises his head, his eyes red as if he's been crying for hours. No anger, no shout, just a soft voice. You just pushed history back a century. He was banished from the palace that very night. No one heard of him again. After that incident, the king had the entire corridor leading to the throne room rebuilt, with mirrors. He believed that if any souls lost their way, they would be blinded by their own image. Palace maids had to walk backwards when leaving the room, and all metal objects were cleansed with pigeon blood early in the morning. You live among all of it from holy wood. 2 locks of hair, 2 cats, 2 silent walls, and you begin to understand. Superstitions are more than just scattered rituals, but it is a system to shoulder the fear, to find order in chaos, to give those in power a sense that they are not alone in their fate, whether by twisting to avoid the shadow of a cat, or keeping silent before a wall engraved with the names of the dead. And you, who are just a small servant, still survive in the palace, not because you are good, but because you understand one thing. Sometimes listening to myths is the only way to survive in a world where the truth can make you disappear. Tonight, the king sits there again, in silence. You withdraw, as always. Don't disturb the stone floor. Don't let out a loud breath. Just quietly go out and close the great door. Behind you, the throne still glistens. You know, the light is not from candles alone. It is from 100 oaths, curses, fears frozen into metal. We'll never really know where the line between belief and obsession lies. But if one thing's for sure, it's this. You've just survived a life. And now, you've lived through a story so bizarre that if you tell it, you'll probably be laughed at. But you know, the most bizarre things are often the ones that keep people silent the longest. Thank you for being with us on this journey. Good night.